Welcome to The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky, a weekly podcast that breaks down politics, policy, and current affairs. I'm Michael Brodkorb. I've been away from the podcast over the last few weeks as I needed to focus on my recovery from being hit by a car outside my home in April. While my recovery isn't complete, I'm excited to announce that I will be returning to the podcast next week. I want to thank you all for your kind messages of encouragement and support over the last few months. I also want to thank my co-host Becky Scherr and special guest co-host Jeff Kolb for continuing the podcast while I needed to focus on my recovery. Becky and Jeff's food takes have been complete garbage, but their interviews with A-plus guests and conversations breaking down interesting topics have been insightful and fascinating to hear. Due to the July 4th holiday, this week's episode will feature a previously aired discussion Becky and I had with one of the most respected Minnesota journalists, Pat Kessler. I've also included Becky and Jeff's food fight with Brodkorb and Becky, featuring their guest, Kyle Potter. The fight was over the best Taco Bell menu items, past and present. I want to thank you all for listening to The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky. I've missed recording the podcast, and I can't wait to be back with a fantastic new episode next week. We are incredibly happy to be joined this episode by one of the most knowledgeable political reporters in Minnesota, Pat Kessler. Pat started with Minnesota Public Radio, but most of us know him from his 36 years with WCCO. If there was a major political story or a minor political story in Minnesota in the last 40 years, Pat Kessler was either breaking the news to Minnesotans or explaining to them why they should care about it or be interested in it. He is a Minnesota institution. And as for a podcast that focuses on breaking down public policy, politics, and general what's going on in Minnesota from the political perspective, I cannot think of someone who would be more knowledgeable to have on this episode and be a guest of the show. And we hope that this experience is enjoyable for him, where this could be the start of something where he'll come back and talk with us. But we wanted to talk with Pat Kessler today. And Pat, can you hear us okay? We're glad to have you on the show.
I'm so grateful that you invited me. Thank you so much. I love the podcast. A longtime listener, first time guest.
You are, and not to make you bashful, but you are a Minnesota institution, and it is such a privilege to have you on today. As I was typing that up, I was, being, since it's accurate. I don't want you to have to do a reality check of your own appearance on the show, but you have been involved in Minnesota politics for, you were with WCCO for 36 years. Prior to that, with Minnesota Public Radio. I think the 84 presidential race was one of your first big races you covered in Minnesota. So you've been a part of certainly our listeners' years, but certainly my formative years in Minnesota politics, seeing you reporting on TV, but then interacting with you at the state capitol and other things. It's just a real treat to have you on today, and just on a personal level.
Well, thank you so much, Michael, and you've always been so important to me, and I love seeing people like you, Becky. We need the younger folks to come in, and Michael, you're much younger than I am, but seeing the new generation is something that is so important. And thank you for that overly kind introduction, because it's been a great run. I had a great run.
But you still have your toe a little bit involved. You're still doing some analysis. You're still doing stories. So we haven't lost you completely.
That is correct. I like to call myself the old guy emeritus. They call me in at WCCO television if there's an election, if there is an infection or an insurrection. I tend to, so I keep going. I keep going. So it's been a great time going back. And then I do radio still. So I'm still very busy and enjoy this immensely.
Becky, you've interacted with Pat over the years, correct?
Absolutely, yes. When I worked for Congressman Emmer, Congressman Lewis, a number of different folks, definitely have had interactions, and and certainly, one of the good ones. There's a lot of good ones out there, but, Pat, you've been one that I think always does a good job of telling the story, sticking to facts, and making sure that, listeners or viewers understand the full picture of the interview or story that is being
And I
shared.
appreciate that so much coming from you, Becky, because as Michael and I have talked about in the past, being accessible to reporters, as you both have been, is so, so, so important. And you take your job seriously. And if I may say this, you don't take yourself as seriously as you take your job. So I love that about you. You always treated us with good humor and professionalism. And that's how we have to work in this system, particularly with public officials and with journalists. That's just the way it has to be.
When Becky and I started talking about doing a podcast, we sat with a number of people and sat down and came up with a list of people that we wanted to have on the podcast. And Pat Kessler, Pat was on the list immediately. He was one of the first names mentioned. And that's because of your institutional knowledge, your experience. And there's a variety of subjects that we could have you to come on, and we want to have you come on. One subject I just want to just briefly mention is always enjoyed your reality checks. As someone who worked in communications and opposition research, getting a passing grade or some type of quality mark on a reality check was critically important. And I will also say to the political nerds out there and to the people who sometimes are political nerds who sometimes get frustrated with the media, I will tell you, as someone who's designed campaign ads, worked with campaigns, this is where the media plays such an important role, because making sure that you run an ad that can pass a Pat Kessler fact check or a reality check absolutely factors into the constructions of ads. And so when you have media that's doing reality checks, that's fact checking the politicians, that makes campaigns more accountable to the public and to media. It's a very important public service. And I just want to just say again, one of the many hats you wore that I respected was certainly the reality check.
And I'm troubled to bring this up because one of the issues, I think, is that I wonder if it mattered because first started with fact checking, it was new and innovative back in the day. But now you could have fact check 24 hours a day. There's a torrent of misinformation, disinformation, camouflage, misdirection, all of that, and it's more than it's ever been before. It's not less. And so, figuring out new ways to do it, I think, is really important for young people in this profession.
If I may ask, the first campaign I worked on was Boschwitz, Wellstone 96. My understanding was that your first year you did the reality checks? Because I remember there being some reality check discussion.
Yes, that was the first time we ever did that, and it was hugely controversial. We took great care to make sure we found misinformation or spin, and it was spin back then. It wasn't deliberate
Correct.
lies as we see today. And it was very controversial because that took us out of the role of what was thought of as a traditional reporter. This person said this. On the other hand, this person says that. They were equal. And we, for the first time, were making a judgment on what was more equal than others, or what was true, what was false, what was misleading. So hugely controversial in the day, but people came to accept it, and it became very common over the years.
Michael and I did a little of our homework in preparation for this and listened to an interview you did with Ben Lieber. And one of the things that I think was interesting that you discussed there was misinformation versus disinformation. And can you kind of walk through what those words mean to you, and maybe how that's evolved over the last couple of years, maybe even
Yeah,
decade?
it's a great question because misinformation to me, is leaving out some information. It might be a little bit of spin, which I completely accept as part of the role of a public official or a candidate who is running for election. Here's my view. Here's my spin on this. I accept that. It's misinformation. Disinformation is the deliberate uh, uh, dissemination, the deliberate speaking of different things in a campaign that are either not true, you know them to be not true, they are they have a very, very basic truth or not truth to them, and you use it anyway. So it's when a politician says something that is not true, knowing it's not true, I would call that disinformation. And again, camouflaging, misinformation, spin. I'm not going to ever say it's okay because I much prefer everybody's transparent, but I understand the role that different people play in order to get elected. You're appealing to your voters, so that is one of the that's one of the differences that I see.
Do you go ahead, Becky?
Oh, I was just going to say, and I believe I probably know the answer to this, but do you believe that we see more of that disinformation now than we did 10 years ago?
Much, much more, and disinformation is kind of a polite word. I've always tried to avoid the word lie, and I'm thinking, and I have to, I'm pretty sure, because we had many discussions about this in the newsroom. I never used the word lie in a story. We would never say this person is lying, this person is a liar, this is a lie. We would say this is not true or this is true. So and now I do feel that there is deliberate lying that goes on, and people know it's a lie, and they say it anyway. And that's one of the biggest differences that I see. And it's a tremendous challenge for reporters, and particularly young reporters, who have to corral this into one place, because I dealt with television ads, political speeches, and TV. And basically, nowadays, we have to deal with all manner of different platforms on social media, radio, podcasting, uh, uh, television commercials, Facebook, TikTok, all of it we have to deal with. And it's really, really difficult to get it into one place.
I will share a Pat Kessler story that I have that reminds me of, and it goes to I think his it's an example of, I think, his fidelity to the truth and his desire to pursue it. Remember when I was deputy chair of the party, I was asked by Pat Kessler at a press conference at MNGP headquarters if I believed that Barack Obama was born and was qualified to be president, because there was a birther movement that was moving around at that time, and it had percolated with a lot of the activists. I remember discussing it with the research director at the time, Mark Drake, that we knew you were there. We knew the question was possibly going to come up, and we went over it. And we knew that we had to deal with it head on. And I did not subscribe to the school of thought. The conspiracy theory at the time was that Barack Obama was not a legal resident of the United States, and that there was some birther movement. I never subscribed to that. But I remember you asking me at a press conference about it, and it was a well questioned, well formed, well structured, good question, and I had a responsibility to answer it. I took some heat for my answer, but it was a good question that you asked, and what it reminds me of is you and Becky were talking, and it was a great question by Becky. It reminded me about just your kind of shoe leather kind of beat reporting was always kind of about the facts, and I think it's remarkable. I think it's honorable. I think it's what journalism should do. And I just wanted to share that little tidbit that I had. I've been on the receiving end of more than one of your kind of inquiries about facts, but that was one that it didn't seem very significant at the time. But I think it was the start of, I think, the introduction of the kind of the conspiracy about whether Barack Obama was was a natural, his birth, where he was born, the long
movement.
form, all that movement.
Something
I think
different.
I think it really was kind of the start of the kind of misinformation movement, and you were on it back then. And I just wanted to share that with our listeners.
Well, that is a time I remember that things were really beginning to percolate all around the country, including here in Minnesota. And what year was that? Would that be 2000?
2009 or 10.
So fairly late.
2009 or 10.
That would be fairly
Probably two.
and many of the conspiracy theories which were beginning to blossom. And remember, did the iPhone come into being in 2010? It's right around that time. And then
Yeah.
we started to have different social media sites, like Twitter and Facebook, primarily at the time. So a lot of things were spreading, and now it's to the point where it's much different, where truth, false things that are false, lies become the truth, and the truth becomes a lie, and there's hardly any way to stop it.
What's interesting, it's a good segue to the topic that we wanted to have you on about, was, as we all remember and all know, is that then private citizen Donald Trump was one of the initial pushers of the birther movement and that agenda. And the subject that we wanted to have you on to talk about was the recent CNN town hall meeting and your perspective on it. It occurred last week. There's been a lot of debate in the media about and amongst the general public about the appropriateness of CNN doing that town hall meeting. Becky and I have perspectives. I think it's fair to say, and I'll let Becky describe herself, but I certainly am not a supporter of President Trump. I didn't vote for him in 16 or 20. And we have a mixed relationship with him on this podcast. But I wanted to get your perspective on the decision by CNN to have him on, and in particular, fact checking in real time, because you have such a strong role in kind of even before Snoops and other websites that are out there fact checking, leading a role in that type of stuff. Your perspective on that event and the appropriateness of it.
It's such a great question, you guys, because it's two separate questions. Number one, should CNN have done it? And number two, the execution of it. How well did they do it? And I'm in the camp, and I don't know exactly where either one of you fits, and I'd love to hear this. I believe, of course, you got to do it. Of course, you've got to have the former president of the United States, who is the leading candidate for president in the Republican Party, and not even close, by far, and more likely than any other candidate right now, to be the next president of the United States. Yes, you have to have him. And how do you do it is the more important question to me. Yeah, you got to have him on. And I know people are boycotting CNN and highly critical of that decision, but it's not even close to me. You've got to have him on. And I'd love to know what you think, and we can move on to the next part. But that's it's a no-brainer to me.
Becky?
I agree. I think that it's one of those things that folks don't like to give him more time. I know there was some reports back before even the 2016 election about the amount of earned media that Trump got versus Hillary Clinton and other candidates, even pre-primary, and just how much, maybe, different outlets gave him a hand up by giving him this attention. However, in this situation, he is the running, the front runner for the Republican nomination. He is a former president. And we do owe it to voters of across the spectrum the right to hear from him, whether you like it or not, whether it's setting up Democrats' ways to attack him, whether it's setting up DeSantis and other ways to go against him, or just to hear really what we're getting and remind folks of that. So I think absolutely they needed to do it. I'm glad to do it. For the record, again, we'll make it clear my name is Becky Scherr, and I am not a Trump supporter. I do hope we have somebody else, but it needed to be done. Absolutely.
I agree with Becky. My name is Michael Brodkorb, and I'm not a Trump supporter. I didn't vote for him in 16 and 20. But that being said, if people are frustrated about the fact that CNN had an obligation to do that, I think it's more a reflection on the party and politics. That the truth of the matter is that he's the front runner for the nomination. And based on recent polling, you could make the case that he is the front runner to potentially win, that he's in the driver's seat right now in the race. And I was frustrated in watching it. But the reality is that we can't. I don't think it's the role of the media to turn a blind eye to who the frontrunner is. This isn't some random third party. It's the Republican Party, and they're a major party at every level of government. And so the frontrunner, I think, deserves that type of attention. Does it frustrate me? Yes. I wish it was someone else. but it does. It did warrant the attention.
Now, so then I guess the question becomes, was the execution a problem? Because I thought that this town hall was a blank show. I do. I thought it was disgraceful. The forum, as it unfolded in front of our eyes like a slow motion car crash, was shameless. I thought it was nasty. He was unapologetic, extremely mendacious. And CNN did little or nothing, futile attempts to try to curb what was clearly falsehoods, things he was saying that were not true, that could clearly be described as lies. And they didn't do anything to push back enough. And that's only one of the things that I had a problem with. I had a bigger problem with another part that we can talk about in a moment.
So my question for you, because while I agree, on your side of things, if you were in the role as moderator or behind the scenes, what things would you have liked to see to do more of that fact checking, the calling her out? Because I believe Caitlin Collins did at times attempt. I believe this is not something that we were shocked that Trump was going to try to railroad the situation. But what would you like to see there?
Yeah, I thought Caitlin Collins did a great job. What can you do when you have a torrent, a flood, a tsunami of that kind of falsity coming right at you? Things that are just separated, untethered from reality. What do you do? So I thought she did a really good job. And I should also say that the breaking news on the day we're recording this podcast is that she's been promoted. She's going to get the primetime CNN news slot that was once held by Chris Cuomo. So I don't think that's hurt her. And I've always respected her as a reporter. But I've been in these situations, and I've interviewed Trump. I've been to many Trump rallies, all of this kind of stuff. And it's really, really difficult. But I've also been in situations on a local level in our local CBS affiliate, WCCO, where we planned way ahead of time for these kinds of anything that could go wrong in public events, like a U.S. Senate debate or a governor's debate. We go over the questions. We go over what could possibly go wrong, who's in the audience, whether or not the lighting is right. How are the cameras going to behave? We did shot blocking, as we call it. You block the shots for every candidate, which has been criticized in this town hall. But most of all, you've got to have some sort of fact-checking capability. If it's something as simple as a graphic that you put up on the screen when the president says something that is completely false. And very simple. One example would be where Caitlin Collins says, well, Mr. President, you said that you would suspend the Constitution if it meant getting a fair, fixing the rigged elections. I never said I'd terminate the Constitution. I never said that. Well, you can put up a soundbite or a graphic of his tweet where he says exactly that. Something as simple as that. And you can do it in a polite way. Hold on, Mr. President. Let's take a look at this. Let's take a look at what you said on this day, just to kind of stop that steamroller, because he was in command of the room. He was an alpha. He was completely in control of the whole hour. That's just one small example. But I mean, we did learn some stuff too. But that's just one small example that I would fact check him on.
Do you think it's difficult to do that with a former president? Do you think that there is a difficulty?
Very much.
Again, to repeat.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think Caitlin Collins is great. I think she's worthy of the promotion. It's going to be great to watch her in that time slot. I think she did as best as she could. I think she did as good as anyone else was going to do. There's a part of me that thinks that the institution of CNN could have done more to put her in a better
situation. That's just one of the things that I talk about, like having blocking out the shots in a different way, having a fact check capability. You've got one of the biggest news organizations in the world, and to not be prepared with pieces of paper or graphics or all of that you put up. But I concur that it's difficult to interview a president, any president, because you have to walk the line of respect for the institution and the office and then hold somebody accountable. But you've never had a president like this who has no respect for the norms, for the traditions. Frankly, there is no bottom to the things that he might say. But the one big problem, I think, with this CNN town hall was the audience itself, where remember that all of the things I made a short list. It's actually a long list, but I'll only read a couple of them. The things that the former president said: he's going to pardon the January 6th the rioters. He would solve the war in 24 hours. He mocked the sexual assault victim that he was convicted of the sexual abuse the day before. Um, and he said he would suspend the Constitution, all of this. But let's focus on the woman, the assault from the day before, where a jury in New York City found him liable for sexual assault against the newspaper columnist from 20 years ago. He mocked her, and the audience just laughed and cheered. Oh, rape. Oh, that's so funny. Sexual assault. Tee hee hee. Mm-hmm. At some point, I wonder, and I've seen other town halls where you do this, where you interact more with the audience, you stop it down, you go into the audience to the people who are laughing and say, why are you laughing? What is funny about this? That would have been shocking. It might have been it might have been a way to bring all of this back to some sort of reality, to ground it in some way. But I think it was a runaway train.
Yeah, I think, Michael and I think that goes right into a lot of our frustration that we talk about with the Republican Party as a whole. I think Michael and I both identify on some level of the spectrum with as being Republicans. I'll let Michael say if he's bowing out of that at any point. um, but and that is our frustration, because this is now this platform that we all agree should have been given to the president is also being given to these Republicans, representing the Republican Party. And it's unfortunate, it's sad, it's embarrassing. And that's something that, we're kind of trying to hopefully, with this podcast, try to show that there are, I don't know if I want to call us sane, but quote unquote sane Republicans
Absolutely,
out there. Because it is upsetting.
Absolutely there are. And so the selection of an audience in this particular case was important. And I haven't actually seen a really good explanation of why. I get it that you want to get people who might have voted for Trump in 2016 or 2020, but there was nobody else. There were no independents that I could see or that they featured. Anybody who was really skeptical of the president. It did seem like full-on red flag, red hat MAGA. Red pill MAGA people in there. But you say sane Republicans, of course there are. I mean, but they are not getting. Many Republicans are not getting, and the platform in order to talk about what are quote unquote normal Republicans. And I have to say this: the Republican leaders are not helping in this regard as the presidential campaign heats up.
No, and I think that I think that the town hall, the way it was structured in a way, I think will at the end of the day, it will boost Donald Trump's standing in the race. Absolutely. I think it brought a carnival-like atmosphere to the race for president, which a lot of people sometimes like. They like the entertainment value. There was a number of lines I think that were crossed by some of the supporters in the audience. I understand the arguments from CNN, that leadership, that they've said that this is a section of America that can't be ignored. And so they need to draw some attention to those issues. But I think there could have been some things done to help present a more professional environment for that town hall to happen. But unfortunately, Republicans, I have to accept some responsibility for that. This wasn't like it was an undercover Mike Wallace ambush on the street. This was a town hall meeting. They knew the cameras were on, and this is how they acted. And I think it brought out the reality sometimes of the unfortunate nature of politics these days, and the kind of the ugliness that can happen.
Well, by degree, I agree that I think that former President Trump did something that might even be called valuable, because normally he's a little vague on where he stands. He's suggestive. He won't actually say something, but he said things here that, if he's reelected, uh, that we could probably count on. I mean, you got a pretty clear idea that he says that the United States should go into default in this big default debate. I think that was pretty clear. That he said he will pardon the January 6th rioters. That was very, very clear. He did not say whether Russia or Ukraine should win. I think, of course, that raises the issue of future military aid to Ukraine. So that was helpful to see, but I think most of America already knew this, and that was Trump 2.0 or 3.0 now.
One of the discussions that's come out of it is whether it is the responsibility of the media to make news. And that's one of the discussions that came out, is that it's that, and some folks have said it's our job to make news, and others have said no, it's your job to report the news. I think that, and I'd like to get your perspective on this. At least the way I see it, CNN engages in both, in a sense, and these cable news networks do. There's straight reporting that they do, but they also have opinions. They also have shows where they invite guests on and draw out comments and stuff. Do you think your take on the role of the media is to report news, not make news?
That's the first time I think I've ever been asked that question, and I've thought about it in some ways, but there is a difference between making news and breaking news, and they're two different things, and they both are valuable in their own way. After this town hall, I see that CNN executives were saying, "Well, she made news. Caitlin Collins made news, and we made news on this." And it's more than just drawing out information. It was almost as if they wanted to make news. I get it. I totally get that. That is part of the job. But breaking news is something a little bit different. It's when you find out something that no one else has and you want to be first with it. So those are two different things. I think they're both valuable, but I was always really reluctant to, how do I say this? I was really reluctant to push something that I knew would make news, but I was making it bigger than it should be. You have to figure out where something fits in a news story. But I think both of those are probably valuable, Michael, and Becky. You probably were involved in a lot of things like that in your career, still are.
Yeah, it's definitely a fine line to know how things go and what actually is reporting the news, what's getting clicks, what's trying to, at times, I've worked for some not quiet,
Sure.
meek individuals
Yeah.
who, at times, I think that there were certainly different
Well,
folks
can I
who
ask this
were.
question? I don't mean to interrupt, but it's so interesting because when reporters come into you, when you've got some of your really great candidates or elected officials, do you always wonder if they're in there to make news out of your guy?
I would say, a good like 75-80% of the time, having the relationships, like I knew putting somebody in front of you, I wasn't worried about, some salacious, question. If there was something of topic that you needed to ask about, that was fair. If there was something we were expecting to come up, but I didn't have to worry about you trying to, get something on the front page of the Washington Post or the New Yorker or something. And I think there's some reporters where you're always kind of like, well, they could definitely ask that. So I think it's less about every interview and more about who the interviews are with, if that's going to be the case.
I'm really sorry to interrupt you, but it was so interesting remembering what you do.
Yeah, and I think that's again, it's really just there are a lot of really, really good reporters out there. There's a lot of really good journalists that I've worked with and I've met along the way. And then there's some that you definitely do see some of those folks who are trying to, who have more opinions that they're trying to insert the story. Or sometimes you hear the questions they're asking, and their story's already written, and they're just trying to get that quote that fits into their pre-written story. And so that's where they're going. And so, yeah, it depends on the person.
Yep.
Certainly is.
Really interesting.
Do you think, as we segue into our next subject, do you think that CNN's standing and how people feel about CNN and the media was enhanced by the town hall meeting, or do you think it was didn't make a difference?
Is it okay if I say I don't know? I
Of course it
really
is.
don't know. I think if the goal was of CNN was to enhance its standing, I don't know that was accomplished. If it is just to truly to say, we have this opportunity to present you the leading candidate for president of the United States. This is news. Probably, but that's a really hard question to answer.
And the subject that we want to transition into is there is a recent poll that came out by The Economist and YouGov, published the results asking Americans where they get their news from and how much they trusted 22 prominent media organizations. We'll link to the poll when we release this episode. But at the top of the list was the Weather Channel, PBS, BBC, the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, and then the Associated Press. CNN was in roughly the same place as the National Review, the New York Post, and other kind of somewhat of opinion commentaries. What does the fact that the most trusted news sources are the Weather Channel and PBS, what does that offer to you about where Americans have their faith and trust in media right now?
Well, first of all, who doesn't love the Weather Channel? I mean, seriously.
Yes.
In a part of the country, we are in the Midwest and in the upper Midwest, the Great North. Weather is news every single day of the year. I mean, who doesn't love Jim Cantore? Who doesn't love everything that they do? I do have questions about this poll. I think overall, 30,000 feet, I think it does reflect that there is a general mistrust and distrust of the media. And I think a lot of this has been stoked by prominent politicians in both parties, Democrat and Republican. So I think it does reflect that. I was a little skeptical, to be honest, because PBS and BBC, of course, people tend to love that. But who watches PBS and BBC? I mean, and I don't mean because they're not good, because they're excellent, but who watches all these? And you got 1,500 respondents. I tried to look at the tabs on the poll, and did all 1,500 watch all of these from Weather Channel to Breitbart? I don't know the answer to that. So I wonder if this is more name recognition. And I saw that the Democrats trust MSNBC, no big there.
Mhm.
Republicans trust Fox, no big surprise there. But when you look at the poll, it looked like Democrats trust InfoWars more than Republicans trust CNN. Now, does that
Correct.
make sense to you guys?
No, it doesn't. I will say, go ahead.
No,
Pat.
I said not to me in general, but it does overall. I think it reflects in a fairly valid way that people don't trust the quote unquote mainstream media.
Two things. I will say, number one, I think PBS's high ranking was because Becky Scherr made her debut
Yeah.
on Almanac on Friday night. So I think that had a big impact in that.
Oh,
See.
go
Yeah.
on.
Yeah, so I was glued, and my household was glued to Almanac to watch Becky's debut appearance on Almanac, which she did a great job.
Well, thank
A couple things I will also say, and I'd be curious to get Becky and Pat, both your takes on this. I generally rotate through, so I have I watch CNN, Fox, and MSNBC all throughout the day as a way to kind of get the news on a regular basis. Is to get kind of a balance, because I do think there's a little bit of a partisan perspective on all of them. But I'd like to get your take. If you guys are sitting down and watching news at night, What are you watching? If you feel comfortable disclosing, and do you feel the need to kind of cycle through some different media stations?
Go ahead, Becky.
I'll start. I guess, I'll show my age here, and I largely get my news from Twitter, and following the perfectly cultivated feed that I have, poured my last 15 years into. And I would say that largely does link, it's a lot of, I mean, very much across the board. I get Washington Post, I get CNN, I get MSNBC, I get some Fox, some Breitbart. I do try to keep my, eyes on what I believe, especially in my previous roles, what I believe activists or Republicans would be watching. So, I have spent a lot of time, reading and watching Fox in my day. But yeah, I don't typically sit down and watch a whole, hour long show of anyone unless there's some guest on that I'm looking forward to, and catch most of my stuff on Twitter.
And that's fascinating to hear, because Becky, my kids are very similar to you, and you're probably roughly around the same ages, where it's mostly it's Twitter, not Facebook. They're not on Facebook, but a lot of the social media sites. YouTube is very big for news. Most of the young people now get it from social media. 50%, I understand, of young people 18 to 34 get their news from social media. 50%, 50. Now, I still am old school in many ways, where I subscribe to the newspapers, the paper newspapers of locally, the Pioneer Press, the Star Tribune, but also the New York Times and Wall Street Journal. So we have that. But then I go online to look at the rest. I come from a news family. My wife is a news executive also, and from the news business, I should say. And so at night, you know, I think we're sick of it, but we spend a lot of time on all three, just like Michael does. My wife doesn't like to sit down and watch news when she gets home from her news station. You know what I mean?
Can't imagine why.
And so we do watch a lot of sports. We watch a lot of sports, and when that gets too much, we will watch the Food Channel and the home. What do you call it? The HGTV, where you fix up the homes, blow them up. So that's our news diet, and also podcasting. Seriously, we listen to a lot of podcasts.
And yes, and I will also say part of the reason I have younger kids, my kids are teenagers, and so they don't. We keep them off social media because we think my wife and I are not big fans of kids being on social media, but we've tried to instill a little bit of balance and awareness into the local media and cable shows and national shows to kind of raise their kind of civic IQ.
Yeah. And hey, Michael, I'm really curious what you think, because should there be age limits on social media? And Becky, I mean, you're going to have to deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
I will say to you as I've said to my kids that it's like old pictures of kids in like the 20s and 30s where they're smoking cigarettes. They didn't realize the health effect. I've said to my kids very frequently that at some point, probably when they're adults, they're going to realize the dangers of social media for younger kids. I as someone who steers my kids away from social media. They don't have full access to any social media. I absolutely think it should be raised because it's very detrimental, particularly, and I've disclosed this before, having daughters. I think there are a lot of issues that can percolate on social media with young kids, and raising strong kids, particularly, but also strong females. Social media is sometimes not the best place for young girls. And I worry about that environment
Becky,
a lot.
what are you going to do?
Oh, goodness. That is $1 million question. I was lucky enough that Facebook just came to be when I was in college, and then, it started out just for college kids and that sort. So it was thankfully not around when I was super young. But I will say working on some of the campaigns, even after I would get done with the election cycle, I would have to turn off Twitter. The toxicity of even just, some of the stuff when I worked for Jason Lewis, and some of the rhetoric and stuff from the radical liberals against him that would come to me, and being called a gender traitor, to women's species because of working for, Jason Lewis. getting stuff like that was really tough on my mental health, I will say. And so, I've taken breaks at times. So I absolutely, I mean, I have a 10-month-old, so we're quite a bit away from this, but I absolutely think there's going to be limits in this household to access and where it can be, because it is, there's lots of potential for trouble there. Absolutely.
Sorry. And I know I hear stories about this, and we female reporters that I've worked with over the years face all of the same things. And where are we in journalism and in public affairs and all of this, where women get a lot more threats and intimidation and those kinds of messages? And I'm just so sorry to hear this. And somehow, some way, we've got to get our arms around this.
Mm, absolutely. I think it's still going to be a while. I don't think there's any solution in the near future, but we've got a new CEO coming in on Twitter, so we'll have to watch how that plays out.
Pat, I got to remember, just as we close out here today, I got to just share one story. 1996 campaign. I'll go back to one more time. There was one computer in the Boschwitz office that had access to the internet, and no one was allowed to touch it. And I was doing some comms work back then. It was just and so it's amazing how much times have changed with the internet these days.
How'd you distribute your press releases there? Like carrier pigeon?
We had a fax transmission service that we used that did a lot of. I remember having to go in and manually program aside from, email was a website. The website was basically Boschwitz's literature, just like scanned in. That was the website back then. And a lot of the press releases were distributed email, going to the press corps, but also one of my big jobs was programming a fax machine, a fax distribution list on fax machines.
One of my favorite things that I've seen today on this podcast is seeing the smile on Becky's face. Like, oh, that is so cute. Yeah. Oh, we had one in 1996. We had one computer in WCCO television, a major metropolitan market TV station. And one person was allowed to use it and had to make a request in order to do research on Google, something called Google back then. And it cost $5 every time we did it. And so you had to run it by everybody. So same deal. That's the way it was. And then we walked to school in a snowstorm without boots backwards up a hill. And that's what we did.
Yeah. One last story. My kids asked me once what I watched on Netflix when I was a kid. Yeah. They just asked me what I watched on Netflix when I was a kid.
Asked me television when I was a kid.
Oh, wow. Pat, you have been incredibly gracious with your time today. This has been such a great episode. Again, you are an institution to Minnesota politics, to our state. We hope this experience was enjoyable to the point where you'd consider coming back. I'd love to talk with you more about your work on fact checking, your perspective on the media and other topics that you're so knowledgeable
Well,
about.
It's really been an honor, and I appreciate this opportunity so much. And you guys are fantastic. So please keep doing this. Keep up the good work. It's really fun to listen to.
Thank you so much. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Pat.
I have to confess, I'm only doing this guest host gig for a short period of time until Michael comes back. And I had a couple of food fight items that I wanted to do, and Taco Bell menu items was one of them. And I know that Kyle is a fellow Taco Bell aficionado. So there was kind of a dual purpose to inviting you here, because it got to force the issue of doing the Taco Bell menu item list. So Becky, we're going to move on into the food fight with Brodkorb and Becky, except for it's with me and Becky, and then also Kyle Potter. And the topic this week is Taco Bell menu items. And as I clarified, these can be either existing current Taco Bell menu items or discontinued menu items, in case you have a love long gone. Kyle, why don't you go first? We go from number 1, your favorite, to number 5, and just kind of a rapid fire here. So go ahead. What's your number 1?
The number 1 Taco Bell menu item, indisputably, is the grilled cheese burrito, which is not what it sounds like, but it is the best burrito that you can get at Taco Bell. They just kind of like fry some cheese on the outside in like a little quesadilla grill or something. I don't know. It comes on and off the menu. It is incredible. In fact, it's so incredible, it's better than the number 2 item in my books, which is the Crunchwrap Supreme.
Oh, we're not ready for number 2. We got to go.
Okay. All right. Well,
Sorry, round robin.
Nobody heard that, and we'll move on.
Becky, what's your number 1?
Okay, so my number 1, I am a child of the 90s. I'm going Chilito all the way.
Yeah, you are correct. Kyle is wrong. My number 1 also the chili cheese burrito / mega cheese Chilito, which is just a souped up version of the chili cheese burrito, but that is the indisputable menu item. Kyle, what's your number 2? I'm thinking Crunchwrap Supreme.
You're correct. For the first time ever, you're hearing from me that the number 2 item is Taco Bell's Crunchwrap Supreme. There's a reason why it has inspired many duplicates, some of which are quite good, others which are very terrible. But yes, number 2, Crunchwrap Supreme.
Becky.
My number 2, I'm just going plain old chicken quesadilla. Pretty much got me through college. I probably had that no less than 3 meals a week in college, if not more. There was one on campus, right outside my dorm. I mean, come on.
Fantastic. Soft taco is number 2 for me, just the classic soft taco, usually best late at night when you just are looking for simplicity. Just the straight soft taco. Kyle, what's your number 3?
Not even Supreme?
So Supreme, okay, but I don't like the tomatoes, so then with sour cream but no tomatoes, I didn't want to make it complicated, so I just said soft taco. What's your number 3, Kyle?
My number 3 is the Baja Blast.
Okay.
A little bit out of the ordinary. Probably weren't expecting a whole lot of beverages, but if Baja Blast can only get it at Taco Bell, my personal favorite is to do like half Baja Blast and half standard Mountain Dew. It looks a little bit like antifreeze and something you shouldn't be drinking.
Fantastic.
But it's very good.
I have to tell you, I was in Las Vegas a few weeks ago, and the Las Vegas Cantina on the Strip actually has alcoholic versions of most of those freezy things that they have.
They sure do.
Definitely worth a visit. Becky, your number 3.
Yet another discontinued, and one that is just mind-blowing to me that they would ever think to get this off, border fries. I mean, come on. I love potato Lays are great, but Taco Bell far superior. So border fries, bring back.
I can't argue with that. Mine is also a discontinued menu item, the Big Beef Mexi Melt. If you never had a Mexi Melt, it is seasoned ground beef, 3 cheese, which is a different kind of cheese. It's not just the regular cheddar cheese. It's a 3 cheese blend. And then the pico, which is also discontinued. So Taco Bell killing me here. But that used to be a real staple of mine, was a chili cheese burrito, a beef Mexi Melt, and a soft taco was the lunch of champions back in the day. Kyle, what's your number 4?
Number 4 is the Doritos Locos Taco. It's not very often that these kind of items stick around for as long as that has. It feels like it's been about a decade, but I think it's earned its place in the top 5.
I don't hate that at all. My number 4 has already been said by Kyle's number 2, Crunchwrap Supreme, baby.
All right. My number 4, the Cheesy Gordita Crunch. It is it's got a layer of cheese in the middle between the gordita shell and the taco shell. It just, you can't go wrong. It's like a flavor overload. All right, Kyle, the last number on your list.
Number 5 epitomizes every feeling I have about eating at Taco Bell, which is generally, should I be eating this? And that is the Nachos Bel Grande. It looks horrifying, I will admit that, but it is very, very good.
It's also about 6 pounds worth of nachos too.
Correct.
Which is sometimes you just need it.
So I need to remind people that we don't discuss these ahead of time. We don't have any conversation, text, email chain, anything about this. My number 5 is Nachos Bel Grande, but specifically no beans. I prefer to take no beans and add some lettuce to it, but man, oh man.
No beans is always the right choice, in my opinion. My number 5 is actually a little bit of a twist on what Kyle said earlier, but mine is the Cool Ranch Doritos Locos Taco Supreme, which was discontinued. And I don't know if you've been following Taco Bell news at least as closely as I have, but they have been doing a thing lately where they allow people to vote on menu items that can return from the dead. And the Cool Ranch Doritos Locos Taco Supreme was up against the Beefy Crunch Burrito, which I don't even know what that is. Apparently the Beefy Crunch Burrito won. That'll be back in August. I guess we're going to have to wait for the Cool Ranch Doritos Locos Taco Supreme to come back. I don't know. It's disappointing.
I gotta say, I'm a little surprised no Mexican pizzas. It's not my jam, but I'm surprised.
It doesn't.
I asked my wife before we started to record, and that was her number 1, actually, was the Mexican pizza. She's like, well, Mexican pizza for sure. And I'm like, oh, I didn't have that on my list. I wonder, can we stay married? I hope so.
Well, I hope you can as well.
That would be a way to go out, though, over a dispute of top 5 Taco Bell items. It wouldn't be the first.
My wife's one of her first jobs was at Taco Bell. So we have kind of a shared long taco history in our marriage. So love of tacos is one of the things that brought us together. So, all right. Well, thank you very much, Kyle Potterman from Thrifty Traveler. Thanks for being with us. I really appreciated the conversation today. And follow Kyle at Thrifty Traveler or Kyle Potter MN. For all of your travel needs and the occasional snarky political take.
Thanks, guys. This was a lot of fun.
All right. Thanks, Kyle. See ya.
Bye.
So to wrap things up, we want to thank you for listening to the Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky featuring Jeff Kolb. Before we go, show some love for your favorite podcast by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts or on the platform where you listen. You can also leave a review on our website at bbreakpod.com. Again, that website is bbreakpod.com. You can also find us on Twitter at bbreakpod. Again, that is bbreakpod on Twitter. The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky and Kolb will return next week. Have a great week.
Have a great week.